This videocast will take you through a detailed plan to the answer to this source question from the Edexcel specification. The question is, assess the value of the source for revealing the beliefs of the Spartacists and the reasons for the Spartacist rising of January 1919. Explain your answer using the source, the information given about its origin, and your own knowledge about the historical context. Okay, so remember, with these questions, there are always two lines of inquiry, so make sure you identify those first. The first line of inquiry there is what can we learn about the beliefs of the Spartacists? That's inquiry 1. And the second one is the reasons for the Spartacist rising of January 1919. So that's inquiry 2. You'll see that explicitly referenced in the plan in the structure to the answer. Secondly, in assessing the value of the source for each of those lines of inquiry, you are reminded to do two things. So make that very, very explicit in the way you write your answer. You have to do it A, using the source, B, using the information given about its origin, which of course is that bit there, what we call the provenance, and C, your own knowledge about the historical context. And just a reminder, that needs to be precise additional knowledge. Don't just include knowledge that is in the source. You've got to bring in additional knowledge, and I'll add the word relevant as well, not just bolt knowledge on for the sake of it, but make sure it's relevant knowledge. Okay, so we'll move on and actually look at the source. So as you can see, sources are usually around about 350 words for this paper, and you're given information about the provenance of the source. Okay, so just repeat the guidance about timing. You've got about 45 minutes to answer this question. I mean, the whole exam paper is 2 hours 15 minutes, and you've got to do 3 questions, which works out at 45 minutes per question. Probably on balance in the final exam, I would push more towards 50 minutes for this question and take a little bit off the section B and section C questions, but let's just work on the basis for the moment of about 45-46 minutes for this question. Timing and pacing is absolutely of the essence. It is really crucial that you give yourself a good 9 or 10 minutes to read the source and plan your answer. That is essential. If you rush into an answer, you will not write a good answer. Okay, so make sure you take the time to read the source carefully and think through what your key points are and plan your answer. And I've given you the advice before. Your answer, which you'll see in a few minutes, should be a 6-paragraph answer in my view. An introduction and a conclusion, bookending it, and then in the middle 4 main paragraphs. That would basically work out, therefore, if you say about 9 minutes for the reading and planning, that would mean 36 minutes to write your answer, which would be 6 minutes per paragraph, which is quite achievable. You can write quite a lot in 6 minutes, as you will see. And you'll see below, my own plan is 6 paragraphs. Okay, so let's push on. I'll walk and talk you through the sort of planning, the planning stage, how I would actually approach this. Okay, so obviously the first thing you've got to do is brainstorm the provenance. What are the key things you need to pick out about the provenance of the source? Okay, it's from the manifesto. So that's basically the commitment, what they believe in. That gives value because what the first line of inquiry is assess the value of the source for revealing the beliefs of the Spartacists. Well, clearly it's a manifesto, which is a statement of their beliefs. So that's the point that you could make. The context is 26th of November 1918, so you've got to immediately hone in on that date. It's about 7 or 8 weeks before the actual Spartacist uprising. Now, you will hopefully know that the uprising was between the 6th and the 13th of January 1919. What's happening at this time, 26th of November? Well, it's Hebert's caretaker government. So remember that the war had ended on the 11th of November. 2 days before that, the Kaiser had abdicated. Prince Max had handed power over to Hebert as the leader of the largest political party. He formed a caretaker government that kind of worked hand in hand with the Berlin Soviet movement. And the context is Hebert has made the decision to call elections for a constituent assembly that will meet in January. But there is a radical movement on the left wing of his party, the USPD, the Revolutionary Shop Stewards and the Spartacists, and in particular the Spartacists do not agree with the proposal for a constituent assembly, which they believe will be kowtowing to the middle classes, giving them a say in the future of Germany. And what they want to do is to construct a society built around the Soviets. So there's our sort of immediate context. So, and you'll see those points in the introduction that I'm going to take you through in a minute. Many other Spartacists went on to found the German Communist Party. You're told that, okay? So you're given a bit of information. And the manifesto appeared in Red Flag, the official publication of the Spartacists. So you've got to be thinking to yourself, well, what is the Red Flag? Presumably it is a form of propaganda magazine. You need to be asking yourself, what is the purpose of this? Now, there could be clues as to what the purpose is as you read the source. So be open to that. Be thinking about the purpose. And who is Rosa Luxemburg? Well, she's a Polish Jewess. She was one of the leaders of the Spartacists and worked closely with the other leader, Karl Liebknecht. So again, you've got a bit of contextual knowledge on that. Right, so we'll hone in then on the actual source. Now, in the exam, 2 lines of inquiry, the way I would approach it is this, okay? I would actually have 2 different coloured pens, and I'm going to do this with you. I'll use red pen for the beliefs, because the first line of inquiry is what were the beliefs of the Spartacists? What can we learn about the beliefs? So immediately I can see the word masses is used there, and the masses is used there, and again you see that phrase there, the masses. So there's a clear emphasis on the masses being the working classes, the oppressed, the majority of the people who are exploited by the capitalist class. So we're identifying sort of the beliefs. You've got driven to the slaughterhouse for the sake of capitalist profits. That's clearly a reference to a belief. The fact that the masses are exploited, crushed and starved by the capitalists is clearly a belief. Again, the reference to internationalism is clearly a belief. Proletarians of all countries. That keeps coming up. It talks about the Second International Working Men's Association, which is a reference to the 1889 movement that was started in Paris, the Socialist International. We've got the fact that we are justified before history is clearly a belief. You've got just sort of working our way down, appealing to the solidarity of the proletarians of the world. Again, there's that internationalism bit. So you might want to sort of like draw an arrow just to connect that. That is a belief. You've got sort of working down again, proletarians of all nations. So there again is a connection you could make. Notice how if you make connections, if you see common threads, so the word masses there, the word masses there, and the word masses there, they're all connected. So there's quite a lot there about the beliefs of the Spartacists. Let's change pens. I'll go to green here, and we'll do the second inquiry, which is the reasons for the Spartacist inquiry. What can we sort of Spartacist uprising? What can we pull out of that? So it tells us about Prussian militarism. It tells us that the Kaiser and the Crown Princes have fled. That workers and Soviet soldiers have been formed everywhere. So there's that sort of strong sense about timing, that the time is now it is now the right time, that there it says about the hour has struck. Okay, why is the hour struck? Because of that, the Kaiser has gone, because we have workers and soldiers Soviets. So you can make that particular connection. Other ones, just sort of like looking through. Again, for 4 years, there's a sense of betrayal. Who has betrayed the? Clearly, there's a reference there to Hebert. It doesn't use the word Hebert, but it talks about sitting in the government are all those socialists who have abandoned the Second International. So that's clearly a reference to Hebert. Okay. Hebert has betrayed the German working class for 4 years. That's clearly a reference to throughout the whole of World War One by backing the war. So you're beginning to pick up these references as we go through. Other ones, just sort of working our way down. I pointed out the hour has struck. Look at the last paragraph. Okay, so there's quite a lot in here. We know very well that the governments of the belligerent countries. I'll just sort of jot down there. That's obviously Britain and France, referring to the winners of World War One. Remember, the war had ended 15 days earlier. Dazzling the eyes of the people with the surface brilliance of its triumph. Again, isn't that to do with timing? At this moment in time, there's a risk that the international revolution could be derailed by victorious countries, by the leaders of victorious countries, distracting the workers from their revolutionary destiny. Those sorts of points. So again, it refers to victorious capitalists stand ready to suppress in blood our revolution. Suppress in blood. That is clearly a reference, for example, to the Freikorps in Germany. But it could also be, it talks about Russia, the White Army, the foreign interventionists in Russia. All of those factors are sort of like coming into play. Now, they're all reasons for that central point, which is the hour has struck. The time is right now to move history on and to make to seize power. But we've got to get the workers in other countries to work with us to ensure that our revolution in Germany survives. Okay, so now I've just talked through that. I've done a lot of highlighting, underlining. That probably took about 8 or 9 minutes, okay, which is about the amount of time that you would do that in the exam. I would suggest in the exam that you basically just have a bit of paper and you just quickly jot down those 6 boxes: introduction, and then the 4 main paragraphs, and then the conclusion, and that you'd sort of quickly transfer just a few buzz points into the boxes as you do the highlighting and underlining. And then once you've done that, hopefully you've got 36 minutes left, and you start writing, and you keep your pen moving, and you basically say to yourself 6 minutes per paragraph. So let's have a look at my detailed plan. So now what I've done here is, as you can see, that it goes on to a second page. Okay, so you've got, I'm just going to change colours and just zoom in a bit. Okay, so you've got building block 1 is the introduction. Okay, building block 2, you're commenting on the provenance of the source. Building block 3, you're looking at inquiry 1 and you're making inferences. And inquiry 1 is the belief of the Spartacists. When we go on to the second page, you'll see the 4th, 5th and 6th building blocks and what they do. Okay, so your building block 1 is the introduction, where you establish, show the examiner you fully understand the context. This source was published on the 26th of November 1918. What are the key points that show that you understand what was happening? So the immediate context of this source is that there is a power struggle at this time in Berlin, in the capital, and that power struggle, power has been given by Prince Max to Hebert. That has been given to him, precise date, on the 9th of November, following the Kaiser's abdication. Hebert established a caretaker government, which he called the Council of People's Representatives. 6 members, 3 of them were majority socialists. including himself. The other three were USPD, led by Haas, and they will govern Germany. They're the caretaker government until a constituent assembly is elected, and the date for that election has been set for January 1919. In the meantime, Hebert has reluctantly agreed to share power with an executive committee that has been appointed by the Workers' and Soldiers' Soviets in Berlin. Other Soviets have been forming in the North German cities, sparked by the Kiel Mutiny of 6th of November, and also by Kurt Eisner, who had declared a Soviet Republic in Bavaria on the 8th of November. The Spartacists, who are the extreme left-wing splinter group of the socialists, dismissed Hebert's government as an enemy of the working class. Many Spartacists refused to have anything to do with the elections to the Constituent Assembly because that would give the middle classes a say in the running of the country, and they have urged a violent overthrow of Hebert's government. But Rosa Luxemburg, a Polish Jewish and one of the leading Spartacists, we know, disagreed and believed that the main role of the Spartacists should be to educate the masses to political awareness. So there's a debate within the Spartacists about whether there should be an uprising or not. We know that Luxemburg was eventually outvoted and that the uprising happened on the 6th of January and it lasted a week. They temporarily seized power in Berlin, but we know that it was crushed within a week by Luttwitz's Free Corps. So there's our immediate context. Okay, so 6 minutes to get those key points down, show you fully understand how that source fits into a bigger picture. Then move on to points about the provenance of the source, because remember, the question has said that you must explain your answer using the information given about its origin. Okay, and you're asked to assess the value of the source for revealing the beliefs of the Spartacists. Okay, so very, very important that what you've got to do here when you're commenting on the provenance of the source is think about those sort of key words. Okay, first of all, purpose. Okay, what's the motivation? Why was that source produced? And don't just hang on the weaknesses. It's very easy to identify weaknesses. You can say it's biased, etc. But what you've got to try and pull out, if in spite of the weaknesses, what is its value? Okay, can we extract a value from its weakness? Okay, and you should also be looking at authority. Is the author in a position to know what they're talking about? Okay, so key things I would be saying here are: one, the purpose of the source is to rally workers of the world to unite against their capitalist masters. Okay, in terms of its value, its purpose is it's a message that's targeted at workers in other countries. Who are the capitalist masters? The capitalist masters are Hebert in Germany, and Britain and France, the governments of Britain and France. What are they doing? They're trying to distract the workers of their own countries away from revolution with the surface brilliance of their victory. All quotes from the source are put into italics. Clearly the source is highly biased, viewing events through a Marxist lens. Obviously, I haven't written it down there, but I suppose I should have. In terms of the first line of inquiry, the beliefs of the Spartacists, it is very useful because it is a manifesto. A manifesto is a statement of what they believed. But in terms of the reasons for the Spartacist uprising, it is clearly biased. It is exaggerating the point that Soviets have been formed everywhere, although there was some truth in this. In fact, most of the Soviets were moderate and they were not controlled by the Spartacists. They were controlled by the MSPD and the right-wing USPD. Nevertheless, in terms of authority, Luxemburg was a key participant in these events, well positioned at the centre of the events that she describes. She's one of the founders of the Spartacist movement, and so on. The source is therefore valuable for understanding the hopes of the Spartacists at this crucial juncture. It's always useful to comment on the tone. The tone is of value, okay? It helps us understand what is ticking away in the minds of the author, what motivates them, what drives them, what their hopes are, what their fears are. And that is a particular value. It tells us that there is cautious excitement, almost a celebration. The Kaiser has gone, Soviets are forming, but it is a cautious excitement. There is an understanding that the success of the German Revolution, if it's going to succeed, if the Spartacist uprising is going to be successful, to a large extent it depends on events in other nations, not just Russia, but the belligerent nations, i.e. Britain and France. Okay, so again, just remind you, all the text in red, in bold red, is precise additional knowledge, and you'll notice all the way through this model plan that I make sure that you get some precise knowledge into each building block. Okay, so you're showing that you're developing, extracting points and developing with your own knowledge. You then move on to inquiry 1. Now remember, what you're doing in the next 2 paragraphs is you, and so it's building block 3 and building block 4. What you're doing in these 2 paragraphs is you are drawing inferences. So remember, go back to the question. It says explain your answer using the information given about its origin. Well, you've done that in building block 2, and using the source, and using your own knowledge. Okay, so this bit is particularly using the source. You've got to really show that you have looked at the source and pulled out key points. So key points, notice lots of short quotations that are put into italics all the way through, so just highlight those. Okay, you see all the way through, but you can see how I've also developed those points using own knowledge. Okay, so for example, first inference. There's an emphasis in the source on the masses, the proletarians of all countries. Who are they? They are the oppressed working classes, exploited by the greed of the capitalists. Okay, so you brought in own knowledge. Exploited, crushed and starved, okay, who are using war to benefit themselves. So you've got Prussian militarism, but you've made an inference that the Prussian militarists, you could use the word junkers, bring in own knowledge in other ways, have taken Germany to war to benefit themselves. All sorts of opportunities you could include there. You could use the word Siegfrieden, that we know is a key aspect of a war of annexation, for example. So don't just be led by my own additional knowledge. There are lots of routes to getting the marks with this. Okay, point number 2, there's also a strong emphasis on the source. This is about beliefs of the Spartacists on the international nature of the socialist movement. Okay, so you've got those references, comrades of the belligerent countries, proletarians of all nations. She refers to the Second International Working Men's Association. Great opportunity to put in some own knowledge. So that met in 1889, it met in Paris, it linked and organised the socialist parties of numerous countries into an international movement with its headquarters in Brussels. You'll remember at an earlier stage in the course, I gave you some reading to do from Evans, from his book The Pursuit of Power, a whole section about the Second International. So you could pick up all sorts of points there if you wanted to include. A third inference, okay, that you can make, where Luxemburg says we are justified before history. We as Marxists are justified before history. Aha, you should be thinking, know what that means. Marxism, it's called dialectical materialism. What is that? It's the Marxist belief that history is shaped by class conflict between the oppressors, in other words, the capitalists, the owners of production, and the oppressed, in other words, the proletariat, the workers, the slaves of capitalists, etc. And this class conflict creates this sort of inevitable momentum through conflict and revolution towards what will eventually be a classless society in which the fruits of labour will be shared equally amongst the proletariat. So again, it's a great opportunity to bring in a little bit of your own knowledge about what Marxism is. Just picking on those key phrases inside the source. So that's your building block 3. The beliefs of the Spartacists. Again, look at that information. 6 minutes. You're writing fast. You should be able to get most of those key points down in 6 minutes, but you've got to then move on. Don't feel you've got to get everything down. Some people write faster than others, but you've got to move on. Okay, so you're sort of 18 minutes through your answer at this point. You now move into the next inquiry. Okay, paragraph building block 4. So this is the inquiry, the reasons for the Spartacist uprising. Okay, what can we learn from the source? So you're making inferences again. Again, numerous inferences can be drawn. So for example, 1, Luxemburg refers to the workers and soldiers councils have been formed everywhere. She talks about the constantly widening circle of the proletariat. That's obviously a reference to the fact that Soviets have expanded from the port of Kiel to Hamburg to Berlin to Bavaria, that they are popping up all over Germany, that the hour has struck. Clearly the Spartacists feel the time is rapidly approaching for the workers to rise up and overthrow Heber's caretaker government in Berlin. Number 2. Other examples. There's also a sense of urgency that the success of a Spartacist uprising in Germany is dependent on the success of proletarian revolutions in other countries. There's that reference to the tone we said earlier, sense of urgency. We need the workers of other countries to rise up against the governments of their own countries. And this is by no means certain. There's that sort of sense of we're at the turning point here. And what Luxembourg is concerned about is the victorious countries of France and Britain. There's that reference again, proletarians of all nations unite in a common struggle. She urges workers in France and Britain to guard against their own governments who will try to distract you away from revolution by the dazzling surface brilliance of victory, because you're on the winning side. You're going to now rally behind your nation, whereas in fact you should be rallying behind the international banner of socialism. Another example, she refers to the risk of the proletariat revolution in Russia being throttled. That's right at the end of the source, isn't it? What does she mean by that? Use your own knowledge. Okay, you've got to add your own knowledge here. This is a clear reference to the Russian Civil War that is being waged at that time in Russia. What's happening at that time? Well, now that World War I has ended, the British, the French and the Americans are sending armies of intervention over to Russia. They're taking their positions on the side of the White Armies. You should know that from your Russian units. You could talk about Generals Denikin and Miller and Yudenich, etc., etc. Fighting from the outside to crush the Bolsheviks who seized power in the centre a year earlier. So it's by no means certain that the socialist revolution in Russia is going to survive. So here is that sense of urgency. And then thirdly, again, why the timing? Why do we have to take action now? Because Hebert, who is on paper a Marxist, who is a socialist, has abandoned the cause of Marxism. All Marxists have signed up to the Second International, what was agreed in 1889 to work together. But in Luxembourg's view, Hebert has sold out. He sold out 4 years previously when he betrayed the German working classes by supporting the decision to go to war. A clear condemnation of the fact that the SPD leadership backed the decision to go to war in August 1914. You could use the word Bergfriede, put that in. But what you do know, of course, is that Hebert and the Social Democrats felt it was a necessary defensive war. So, again, a lot you can get into that paragraph. 6 minutes, you can pack a lot in there. If you write fast, you don't feel you've got to get every single one of those points, as long as you get some of those key points in to that paragraph. Okay, so you're now sort of 24 minutes into the answer. You've got basically another 12 minutes to go, 2 more building blocks. So we move down to building block 5. And what you're doing here in this paragraph is you're pulling back, you're looking at those lines of inquiry again, the beliefs of the Spartacists and the reasons for the Spartacist uprising that will happen in January 1919. And you're asking, well, hold it. Does the source tell me everything I need to know, or does it have sufficient breadth? are there things that I know that are not covered in that source? Are there gaps in the source? Okay, so what you're doing here is you're asking the question whether the source omits, whether it leaves out any information that will help historians answer the two lines of inquiry. So the points I've made are, in terms of Spartacist beliefs, the source is fairly comprehensive. It is, after all, a manifesto, although it does imply that there is a unity of purpose, that the Spartacists all believe the same thing. You actually know, I hope, that Luxembourg felt that the time was not right for a Spartacist uprising, and that in January 1919, she spoke out against the decision to seize control of Berlin. She was persuaded to go along, but she was a very reluctant participant. And of course, she was then murdered in the course of the uprising. Now, that view doesn't come across in that source. Okay, why not? Because obviously, she needs to present, it's a propaganda, the manifesto has been published in the red flag, it's a propaganda leaflet. Clearly, they're not going to win support if they show internal divisions, so they come across as being united. But we actually know that that wasn't the case. So that's an issue to do with its breadth and its comprehensiveness. Next point, in terms of reasons for the Spartacist uprising, that second line of inquiry, the source exaggerates the extent of working class backing for the Spartacists. It clearly implies that the time is right, that there is a big movement, the workers, the masses, the working classes are coming over to the views of the Spartacists. So it refers to workers and soldiers' councils have been formed everywhere, the constantly widening circle. But in actual fact, we know now that most of the Soviets that are spreading around Germany were not controlled by the Spartacists. Most were controlled by the moderates, the moderate SPD or the right wing of the USPD, sort of like the right wing half of the USPD that are closer to Hebert. And those moderates, they believe that the way forward is to support elections to a constituent assembly, that it should be the responsibility of a democratically elected assembly to decide on Germany's future, that Germany should not be resorting to violence and bloodshed, that the role of the Spartacists Luxembourg certainly believed the role of the Spartacists should be to support that process of educating the masses, and therefore should support the Constituent Assembly elections, whereas she was outvoted and the other Spartacists, the more radical group, went ahead with their uprising. Point number 4. Also, although the source identifies Hebert as having abandoned the cause of Marxism, it fails to provide details about his pact with Groener. There's no direct reference to the Groener Pact, nor does it speak of some of the measures that Hebert has taken which are successfully distracting the workers from revolution. He didn't waste time. He very quickly introduced the 8-hour day. He very quickly extended the social welfare system. This all happened in November 1918. He recognised the rights of agricultural workers and officials to form trade unions. He quickly introduced laws that gave jobs to demobilised soldiers, and he also gave them sickness and unemployment benefits. See Carr, page 242, he talks about those things. And of course there's the very famous Stinners-Legian Agreement that was made on the 15th of November 1918, which is kind of like the economic equivalent of the Hebert-Groener Pact, a contract between trade unions and German industry which established the basics of cooperation between employers and employees. So all of those factors, of course, distracted the workers away from radical left-wing ideas such as the Spartacists' view of an uprising, and are pulling many workers towards the more moderate centre view that the way forward is to elect a constituent assembly that will democratically decide Germany's future. And of course, the point is that Luxembourg makes no reference to any of that in this particular source. Clearly because it's a propaganda pamphlet. It's concerned not to include information that might suggest the workers are not rallying behind the Spartacists. So that's again important building block. 6 minutes to get that across, write quickly, get the key points down, and then you move into your conclusion. Conclusion is very personal. Okay, so every conclusion will be different. I think the key thing is, in your conclusion, emphasize the positive value of the source. I.e., what does this mean? It means its strengths in spite of its weaknesses. Okay, so in the end, you've got to come. What's it valuable for? What's the main value of this particular source? Don't just say, oh, it's full of weaknesses, it's biased, it's not very useful. That's not what the examiner wants to hear. The examiner wants to hear that you can, yes, cut out the dead wood. You understand what it's not useful for. You understand that it has got limitations, but in spite of those limitations, it has particular value. So clearly there are limitations. Sum that up. The purpose of the source as a piece of propaganda is to appeal to workers in other countries to rise up against their oppressors, which will provide the international context for a Spartacist uprising. The source, therefore, is definitely prone to exaggerate the readiness of the German workers to support a Spartacist uprising, and it therefore underplays the fact that Hebert was operating from a position of strength. We know there was much support for Hebert's proposed elections to a constituent assembly, including many German workers, and we also know his pact with Hebert and the German military has given him sort of physical muscle, military strength to suppress an armed insurrection. Yes, but in spite of these weaknesses, the source is very useful for helping us understand the fact that Luxemburg believed the long-term success of the Spartacists in Germany depended on support from abroad. That's the key point. That's the main value, I think, of this particular source. And you see that all the way through. There's a very strong emphasis throughout the source on the internationalism of the socialist movement. She anchors it in the reference to the Second International in Paris in 1889. She talks all the way through about the international element and so constant referencing that in the source. So it's especially valuable for understanding that Luxemburg and the Spartacists believe the German Revolution can only succeed if there is support from abroad. My conclusion, end of answer. Okay, so there we go. I hope that was useful to you. I will stop there. My best advice is learn this plan, sit down, give yourself a piece of paper, 45 minutes, have a go at writing it again in exam conditions. Get the timing right. 6 minutes per paragraph, 36 minutes of writing. Give yourself 9 minutes to jot out a quick plan. Have another go at it. Thank you very much.